sunshine here, and temperatures in the sunny spells, high teens or low 20s, so perhaps a little cooler than today. Again, heavy showers could cause some issues, certainly through Wednesday evenings, rush hour. Again, a lot of spray and surface water on the roads. Thunderstorms are likely in a few spots. Perhaps a hint of a change with the low pressure moving in, the winds easing a touch, but that means slow moving heavy showers on Thursday and Friday. And it does look a little drier for most of us by Saturday.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel, Britain's
news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Hello, good morning. It's 1 minute past 11. This is GB News with me, Alastair Stewart, and I will be with you for the remainder of this hour as Boris Johnson formally resigns as Prime Minister and Liz Truss is invited to form a new government by Her Majesty the Queen. We will keep you right up to date and across all of the morning's events that have already taken place and the later morning and early afternoon events as they unfold. Also, do please make sure that you keep in touch with your views as usual on GBViews at gbnews.uk. We'll be getting through as many of those as we possibly can before the top of the hour. But first, let's bring you right up to date with the latest news so far today. Here's Rosie.
A very good morning to you and thanks, Alastair. It's just coming up to 2 minutes past 11. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. Boris Johnson has promised his fervent support to his successor in his final speech as Prime Minister. He's now in Scotland and is due to arrive at Balmoral shortly after travelling from Aberdeen. He's meeting the Queen to officially resign from office. And speaking outside Number 10 a little earlier this morning, he reflected on his government's achievements, highlighting Brexit, the COVID vaccine rollout and support for Ukraine. Mr Johnson also said the incoming Prime Minister, Liz Truss, and her new cabinet will do everything they can to support families through the energy crisis.
I will be offering this government nothing but the most fervent support. I'll tell you why, this is a tough time for the economy. This is a tough time for families up and down the country. We can and we will get through it and we will come out stronger the other side. But I say to my fellow Conservatives, it's time for politics to be over, folks. It's time for us all to get behind Liz Truss and her team and her programme and deliver for the people of this country.
has just touched down in Aberdeen. Live pictures are there of her flight landing. Her schedule, of course, a little bit further behind the still now current Prime Minister Boris Johnson. That changeover will happen very shortly as Liz Truss will make her way there from Aberdeen to Balmoral, where she will then be appointed Prime Minister by the Queen. Arriving at the airport, we've been hearing from our royal correspondent Cameron Walker, who's on the ground there, that the weather, and you can see, and if you're listening on the radio, it's quite grey. The visibility has been bad. That has somewhat delayed her journey, but we'll keep you across it here on GB News. And Liz Truss later on is expected, of course, then as Prime Minister, to announce an emergency support package to deal with the energy crisis when she then addresses the nation for the first time from Downing Street. Of course, we'll bring you that speech here. She'll then name her new cabinet. What do we know of it already? Well, Priti Patel has said she's resigning as Home Secretary. Nadine Dorries is standing down as Culture Secretary. We'll get much more of a clearer picture as the day develops. Well, the Scottish Shadow Health and Social Care Secretary, Dr Sandish Gillane, told GB News the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, will help unite the UK.
It's good for the Union. When Liz Truss came up to Perth and did the hustings in Scotland, she talked about how we're a family and families don't split up. And so you can see from remarks like that Liz Truss is actually very pro the Union, very much in favour of us remaining together.
In some other news now, a man's died after being shot by police in South London. Lambeth Police says a suspect vehicle was being chased and officers deliberately crashed into the car, forcing it to stop in Streatham Hill on Monday night. A police firearm was discharged and a man thought to be in his 20s was injured. Well, the Met Police has referred itself for an investigation into the incident. The father of Olivia Pratt-Corbell, who was shot in Liverpool, says her death cannot be in vain. The 9-year-old was killed by a gunman who chased his intended target into her home. John Francis Pratt is appealing for anyone with information to come forward. Detectives have been granted a 36-hour extension to question 3 men over her death. Canadian police say one of the suspects in the mass stabbings in Saskatchewan has been found dead. Damien Sanderson's body was discovered during a police manhunt. Officers say his injuries were not self-inflicted and they haven't ruled out his brother's involvement. His brother, Miles Sanderson, is still on the run. They're both suspected of killing 10 people. At least 19 others were injured in the attacks. Commanding officer Rhonda Blackmore warned his brother is still armed and dangerous.
Miles Sanderson, Damien's brother, may have sustained injuries. This has not been confirmed. But we do want the public to know this because there is a possibility he may seek medical attention. Even if he is injured, it does not mean he is not still dangerous. Miles has a lengthy criminal record involving both persons and property crimes.
Tens of thousands of firefighters and control room staff will be balloted for industrial action. The Fire Brigades Union says it follows a 2% pay offer that was made in June, which hasn't been increased despite, they say, soaring inflation. The FBU claims it represents a real terms pay cut. More than 32,000 of its members across the UK will vote next month. You're up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now, back to Alastair.
Hello, Rosie, thank you very much indeed. I believe that we've got pictures of Aberdeen Airport. We have, and here they come. There we are. That is the Liz Truss mobile, the second private jet that has been pressed into action today. There was a slight delay in her arrival, which we didn't want to share for security reasons whilst it was occurring, but the weather in Aberdeen is, as is often the case, I've flown up there many times myself for the fishing and other things. It can get a bit tricky there, blowing in off the North Sea and also coming in the other direction from the beautiful Highlands, and anyway, that delayed it. But anyway, she is there now. She's on board. I don't know who is with her, but I'm assuming that her husband is as well, because it's a big deal. Here's a woman who is, within the next hour and a half, 2 hours, going to become our next Prime Minister. And immediately after yesterday, still gets all of the goodies that are thrown in because, of course, she's still Foreign Secretary until she, as it were, sacks herself and appoints another Foreign Secretary, almost certainly James Cleverly. But anyway, that is the situation there, live from Aberdeen Airport, about an hour and a quarter from Balmoral, and the aircraft on the right that's just come into picture, so you now have the full set, is the Boris Johnson mobile. So there they are, both tucked in. The pilots can say, there we are, that was good fun, we did our jobs, and here we go. Just a couple of quick thoughts, sticking with that image as we now lose Boris Johnson's plane and focus on Liz Truss's. Andrew Sargent in Derby says, technically, as Boris was born in the United States of America, couldn't he now stand a good chance of becoming a candidate for the presidency of the United States of America? Boom, boom. Nettie Rose, I want to read this one out, partly because Nettie's written it so well, but also she genuinely speaks for an awful lot of you when she says, together with millions of others, I'm witnessing a sad day for our country. We've booted out a brilliant Prime Minister who has a record of amazing achievements in spite of the huge obstacles put in his way, plus relentless and vicious opposition from the media and his many and powerful enemies. My prayer, says Nettie, is that he will still be used for the great and good of our nation in a time of such need. And the final quick observation comes from Francis, who says, now at last we're getting to the heart of Trussonomics. The differences between Sunak and Truss are laid bare. £130 billion plus borrowing is not a growth strategy, says Francis. Well, we've discussed that with Liam Halligan, with James as well, and other folk. So that is the challenge that lies ahead of the woman on that aeroplane. I'm imagining that she's probably off because I think I can see a Land Rover, Range Rover, Discovery, whatever it is, on the other side of the aircraft. So very shortly she will be whisked away on what is a lovely journey from Aberdeen Airport to Balmoral. And the minute anything happens there that is different or matters, we'll be straight back there. Now, joining us live for the latest from Downing Street, as opposed to Aberdeen Airport, is, of course, our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, with the latest. So, they're both there. You're still there. Remind folk who've just joined us at 11:10 of the very important choreography of what's going to happen this afternoon.
Yes, absolutely. Whilst this street may seem a little bit empty for the moment, it's going to become incredibly busy after about 4 p.m, although that may be shifting back slightly now because of that slight delay in Liz Truss landing in Aberdeen. It's about an hour for her to drive from Aberdeen Airport to Balmoral, and at that point there have to be two meetings. Of course, Boris Johnson meets the Queen, and then Liz Truss meets the Queen, is appointed officially as Prime Minister, and then has to hurtle back down here to Downing Street to deliver her first address as Prime Minister. That'll be sometime after 4 o'clock. And then as soon as she's delivered that address, gone in that famous black door behind me, the cabinet appointments begin. And one by one, we will see famous faces from the Parliamentary Conservative Party walk down this street. And we'll get to see whether all of this speculation about who is getting which job has been correct. Of course, there are heavy rumours as to who will get what. No doubt, Kwasi Kwarteng, the current business secretary, becoming Chancellor, moving in to number 11 Downing Street. He is one of the closest allies of Liz Truss and has been for some time. But yes, cabinet appointments throughout this evening. It has to be done. The cabinet has to be secure by tomorrow morning, because Liz Truss is planning a cabinet meeting on Wednesday morning. That's ahead of course, a busy day in Parliament, because of course her first Prime Minister's questions comes at midday on Wednesday. But it doesn't stop there, because the rumours are circling that announcements on cost of living help, particularly on dealing with the energy crisis, an announcement on that could come as soon as Thursday. Now, that would be a remarkable timetable for a new Prime Minister who's not even yet officially appointed, but quite possibly first cabinet meeting tomorrow morning, and maybe the biggest decision of her early premiership coming as soon as the day after that. But it's not just cabinet appointments, there are also the mechanisms within Downing Street, the special advisors and such. I understand that a number have been camped out in Dover House, just a couple of houses along on Whitehall. That's normally the base of the Secretary of State for Scotland, but that's where the transition team has been sitting and planning, and this morning we have seen around 12 appointments to Liz Truss's top team in Downing Street. That will continue throughout the day.
Absolutely brilliant. I gather we're just watching you, top left hand of the screen, but also that convoy, nowhere near what the Americans get and the Canadians, which seem to go on forever, but a convoy of Liz Truss's vehicles, and that will be the Land Rover / Range Rover, her in the middle, but also Scottish police will be providing security up front. There'll be outriders once they get out into the beautiful countryside of Aberdeenshire, but there will also be her own personal security following her there as well. That's the scene at Aberdeen Airport, and those are Bristow's helicopters, just in case, because I know people quite like to know this sort of stuff, but it's a vital base also for looking after the rigs and the exploration work that is still going on in the North Sea. And follow my logic, that's one of the things Liz Truss has said she's going to open up in a big way as part of that growth strategy and also that energy strategy. Is Tom still there? Excellent. Tom, we're talking about the big whiteboard and who gets what, and as you say, key appointments this morning, also junior ministers to come. Names will be made, faces that we don't recognise but will become household names. One thing that caught my eye this morning, and I'm holding up for people listening to our conversation on radio, the front page of the Daily Telegraph. Truss urged to make Mordaunt Deputy Prime Minister. We think we know where Tom Tugendhat's going. We think we know where Kemi Badenoch is going. We don't know where Penny Mordaunt's going. And just before you answer that, that was the new Prime Minister's convoy sweeping into the private gates of Her Majesty's Balmoral estate. So she's there. It is now back on schedule and unfolding. So, Tom Harwood, your thoughts on Penny Mordaunt?
Well, it's interesting looking at the idea of who's going to become Deputy Prime Minister. It isn't always a role that is filled. Of course, Theresa May didn't have an official Deputy Prime Minister. There was a de facto Deputy Prime Minister in David Lidington, but of course David Cameron had his Deputy Prime Minister, Nick Clegg, for the first 5 years. He was Prime Minister, but for the next year and a half, he didn't have an official Deputy Prime Minister. Tony Blair didn't, Gordon Brown didn't have one, but Tony Blair did in John Prescott, and of course John Major had one in Michael Heseltine, but Margaret Thatcher didn't. It's an ad hoc position. It's one that some Prime Ministers choose to have and some choose not to have. In fact, at the start of Boris Johnson's premiership, the role of Deputy Prime Minister did not exist. There was the role of the First Secretary of State, a de facto sort of Deputy Prime Minister, which Dominic Raab filled and had to deputise for him during COVID, but that was officialised. It became official in the last reshuffle. But the names being thrown around, if there is such a position to be filled under Liz Truss, the names being thrown around for it don't just include Penny Mordaunt. People have also mentioned Therese Coffey, who chaired Liz Truss's campaign to become Conservative Party leader. And some people have even mentioned Kemi Badenoch, one of the darlings of the Tory grassroots. So it's a big, broad field there. It'll be interesting to see who gets the job if it exists at all.
Absolutely. And a final quick thought, and I know you've got millions of other things to do, but I've been wanting to ask you this since I listened to his interview. My old mate David Miller was on the GB News earlier talking to Isabel and to Eamon, and he reminded all of us of Thatcher's infamous, gorgeous and cherished comment that every Prime Minister needs a Willie, and was, of course, referring to the great Willie Whitelaw, who, as you rightly point out, was not Deputy Prime Minister, but was her fixer alongside the great Lord John Wakeham. They were the boys in the background who made damn sure that the Prime Minister was able to deliver. So it may not be an office bearer, but she needs people who are that big brains who can she totally rely upon.
Certainly, and potentially, if that is to be a role of a First Secretary of State, of a Deputy Prime Minister, that would suggest that someone like Therese Coffey, who has been such a close ally of Liz Truss, who was someone who has been very close with her throughout her time in Parliament, and particularly this leadership campaign too, it would suggest that someone who is personally very close to Liz Truss would be better for that role. Although it's interesting, thinking about Willie Whitelaw and Margaret Thatcher's famous comment, everyone needs a Willie. Willie Whitelaw came from the opposite side of the party ideologically to Margaret Thatcher, but they worked very well together. So I suppose history tells us they don't need to necessarily be ideological allies as things start out, but they do need to get on very well.
Brilliantly observed and brilliantly put. Tom, always a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed. I will keep in touch with you up until noon, and then colleagues will keep in touch with you as the afternoon unfolds. Now, Tom Harwood, was that James you just... it was James. I'm sorry, James, I was rambling on about other people, and there you are appearing there. James, it's terrific to speak to you. James Healy is the deputy editor of the James Heal, I should say, is the deputy editor of the Spectator, which is not only one of the most intelligently written political observatories in our country, it also has people like Steer Pike, and it has witty, light-hearted commentary stuff, and the diary is just an absolute gem. So, what material have you picked up in the last 72 hours that are going to make Spectator readers glow with pride?
Well, I think what we're seeing now is the calm before the storm. Right now, all the action's happening up at Balmoral, and then it'll come down later to Downing Street. We've already seen the Downing Street appointments, but soon it's going to gravitate towards here in the Houses of Parliament, and this is the time when typically people would make mischievous phone calls to hopeful rising stars within the party about possibly tipping them for future jobs, etc. So there's a lot of gossip about who's in, who's out, and already which ministers are starting to pack their offices, and who's got their eye on new settings in Whitehall.
Forgive me, I'm going to break away, but please don't leave where you are on Abingdon Green outside the Palace of Westminster, because I do want to come back to you. I've got to go to Balmoral, and my question when I come back to you is whether Liz Truss also believes that everyone needs a Willie. People who've been listening to our earlier conversation will understand where I'm going with that. James, thanks for now. Stay where you are. Back with you in just a few moments, because, with my apologies to James, I say we can now go to our royal reporter, Cameron Walker, who I said at the very beginning of this programme is there for us live outside Balmoral. Cameron, there's a slight sound delay, I think, so bear with me and bear with him. Over to you, Cameron Walker.
Well, Alastair, the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has travelled from Downing Street to Balmoral Castle here. We just saw him a few moments ago go through the gates in a Range Rover. He's got out the car now with his wife, Carrie Johnson, and has entered the castle to formally tender his resignation to Her Majesty the Queen. I think it's fair to say that he's had a, perhaps at times, pretty turbulent relationship with Her Majesty. Just a few hours into his premiership, he reportedly let slip to an aide what was said in a private meeting between the two of them. The Queen reportedly told the Prime Minister she didn't know why anyone would want the job as the Prime Minister. And then, of course, if you remember, before the pandemic and everything else, back in 2019, he effectively kind of forced the Queen to prorogue Parliament. Critics kind of said that that was Boris Johnson's attempts to block parliamentary scrutiny in the run-up to Brexit Day. And then, of course, the Supreme Court found that that proroguing of Parliament was, in fact, unlawful. And the Queen acts on the Prime Minister's advice, so her hands were tied. And then, of course, last year, following the Partygate scandal at least, the Prime Minister had to make what can best be described as perhaps a grovelling apology to Her Majesty the Queen when it was found that Downing Street staff were partying in Number 10 on the eve of Prince Philip's funeral, of course, married to the Queen for 70 years. Well, Boris Johnson is currently in there tendering his resignation to Her Majesty the Queen at Balmoral Castle. In around an hour, or less than an hour, I should say, Liz Truss, the new leader of the Conservative Party, will arrive at Balmoral Castle, and the Queen will formally invite her to form a government in her name and therefore become the UK's, the Queen's 15th Prime Minister.
Cameron, thank you very much indeed. Cameron will stay there for us. And as he said, just to confirm, Boris Johnson, I think I misled you. I may have inadvertently said it was Liz Truss going in when we saw the motorcade go through. As Cameron quite rightly said, it's Boris Johnson is in there because the resignation has to happen first, and then Liz Truss is on her way now from Aberdeen Airport to Balmoral. But Cameron will stay exactly where he is, and we'll get those pictures for you and give you his take on what happens. We're now sort of halfway through Act 2, and don't forget that Tom is down for Act 3 in Downing Street when it comes to its culmination and the new Prime Minister accepts the invitation of Her Majesty the Queen and then tells us all what she's going to be doing as Prime Minister. After that splendid interruption via Balmoral and Cameron Walker, I'm delighted to return, as promised, to the diary editor of The Spectator. James, you're a man of your word, and I'm very grateful for that. You were saying just before we went off to Balmoral about names in the frame and superstars will emerge and people we've never heard of before. But David Mellor earlier was talking about the importance of having a really powerful deputy, either called Deputy Prime Minister or de facto Deputy Prime Minister, like Willie Whitelaw, like John Wakeham. Do you think Truss particularly needs that?
Well, the response to the question is, I mean, who are the Willies in the party now? Who is the Willie Whitehall? There's no one with the gravitas or experience to take the place that he occupied for Margaret Thatcher. I think the Brexit wars and the COVID fallout mean that a lot of people have been engaged in internecine warfare, and there's no one with that kind of clout across the party right now. So in their absence, it may be a very loyal lieutenant, someone like Therese Coffey, whom has been Liz Truss's friend from the day they both entered Parliament in 2010 together. That's the closest thing you're going to get in the absence, because frankly there aren't the statesmen that we once had, because the party has changed a great deal. But Therese Coffey will probably be the closest thing Liz Truss has to a Willie Whitelaw.
And interestingly, as I said on the programme, I think yesterday, that enormous quality that is rare in modern politics is that Liz and Therese are genuinely long-standing friends, close mates, and that does matter in politics, which is good. The other thing I was keen to ask you, because of the people that you talk to and how you read these things, is that it's the Penny Mordaunt issue. 3 very impressive outside-of-the-loop contestants when this whole process began. Badenoch, we think, has been found a very senior berth already. There's talk that Tugendhat stops being the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee and may go to security, but also get to attend Cabinet. And then the Telegraph, for whom your great editor also writes regularly, says Truss urged to make Penny Mordaunt Deputy Prime Minister.
I'm not sure about that exactly. I think there was a bit of a tussle in some of the debates between Truss and Penny Mordaunt. I think Penny Mordaunt will get a cabinet position. She ran better than I think most people expected, and she's certainly got certain faction of the party really seem to admire her. But I think deputy perhaps is a little overblown. I think look at what Liz is doing the rest of this cabinet appointments. She's appointing more people who are loyal to her. She's really put a premium on that, and you see that in the background appointments she's already made this morning. So I think it will be more Therese Coffey rather than Penny Mordaunt as Deputy Prime Minister.
Of course, worth reminding folk who are not as addicted to this stuff as you and I are, that Penny did, of course, serve in the Cabinet as Defence Secretary before being shuffled sideways to Trade, and therefore it wouldn't be her first outing at Cabinet level. The final point I want to ask for your reflections upon are, as it were, not only the comings but also the goings. Dominic Raab and Priti Patel, ahead of the game, reading the runes, knowing what was going to happen, and off they jolly well go. How worried should Liz Truss be that one or all of them will become positions of critical mass on the backbenches?
That's a really good point, and I think you've got a party that's been in government now for 12 years. There's a lot of the dispossessed and never possessed on those backbenches, and party management will be a key problem, and that's interlinked with the economy. If the economy's going bad, people will get more restless. Those people who lost office will be more likely to stir some trouble up for her. So it's something to keep an eye on, and so I would be worried about that if I were her.
James, always a pleasure to talk to you. And my best wishes to all at the magazine, and thank you for finding time for us on what I know is a busy day for all of you. Thank you very much indeed. James Heal there, the diary editor of The Spectator magazine. Now, we've talked earlier on in the programme to Kate Hoey, and we did yesterday as well, about the situation in Northern Ireland. We haven't done Scotland. Other colleagues have done Scotland to quite a considerable extent. But I'm delighted to say that we do now want to do Wales, as it were, with its First Minister, Mark Drakeford, tweeting, "I'd like to congratulate Liz Truss. We now need to work together with urgency to tackle the cost of living crisis and save millions from hardship this winter. There is no more time to waste. Action is now needed." Now, observers of that will know perfectly well that Mark Drakeford and the outgoing Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, didn't so much as not have a great relationship. They didn't have a relationship at all, hadn't even spoken for more than 6 months. So I'm delighted now to be talking to Welsh Member of Parliament for Brecon and Radnorshire, James Evans. James, good of you to join us. Thank you very much indeed. Do you think that Liz Truss can genuinely build bridges? It's not a question of rebuilding bridges, it's building bridges with Mark Drakeford?
Yes, I do. And the comments that Mark Drakeford has made and the noises he's made are very positive because it benefits the people of my constituency and the people of Wales to have a Welsh government working very closely with the UK government, because there are a lot of areas which are still reserved to the UK government in terms of defence, social security and others. And it needs close working between the First Minister and the Prime Minister to make sure that both governments are delivering for the people of Wales. And I really do hope that Mark Drakeford is true to his word and looks forward to working with Liz. But there has to be an element of disagreement sometimes. We are very different parties. And I do hope that we can find a way through this that respects the devolution settlement and that Liz works very closely with the First Minister to benefit my constituents.
Brilliantly put, if I may, and I'll just pick up the last point there, because nobody, whether they live in England or any other part of the United Kingdom or Wales, can be allowed to forget the fact that Liz Truss is a unionist. She believes in the United Kingdom, but she's not anti-devolution. She may be anti-independence for Scotland, but she's not anti-devolution.
No, and that's the point. And it's been attested in Wales. The people of Wales respect devolution. We had the Welsh Senedd elections and sort of the abolishing the Welsh Assembly Party was defeated well and truly. People in Wales want devolution, and Liz respects that. Liz is committed to myself personally and to my leader, Andrew R.T. Davies, to work very closely with the Welsh Conservative group in the Senedd to make sure that we're coming up with unionist policies and that when things are being discussed in Westminster, that devolution is being taken into account, that it's not being rode roughshod over, and that actually the devolved administrations in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland have a key part of policy decision making in number 10. Because if we are to keep our precious United Kingdom together, we need to make sure it's all working together, cohesively together, and not one part of the United Kingdom feels disadvantaged over another.
Final point, and it's an important one, and bear in mind, I'm an ex-industrial correspondent, and I remember the steelworks, the coal mines, and the old smokestack Welsh economy. It's very, very different now. It's tourism, it's brilliant farming, and it's also the motor industry. Do you think that Prime Minister Liz Truss gets what Wales can contribute to the economic well-being of the United Kingdom?
Yes, I do. And that's one thing which convinced me wholeheartedly to support Liz was at the hustings that we had in Cardiff. She set out a clear vision for the economy, about how we can build the economy in Wales, working very closely with the UK government. She talked about the M4 Relief Road, which is actually going to help businesses across Wales. She's committed to building that. She's committed to work to say on the corporate, and also reversing the national insurance rise, which is going to help working people in our country. Liz Truss understands devolution. She wants to work very closely, as I say, with the Welsh Government and the Welsh Conservative group to actually make devolution work for everybody. And that's what I want to see, is politicians stop arguing and actually getting on with the day job of representing our constituents to make their lives better, because that's what we are elected to do.
Well put. Whatever party you are a member of, and I know which party you are a member of, but that all politicians recognise that. Folk come first and solving problems. Excellent. James, a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much indeed. That's James Evans there with the Welsh perspective. It's 32 minutes past 11 or 28 minutes to 12. Look at it as you will. After the break, we'll be speaking to royal broadcaster and commentator to look into the new Prime Minister's relationship with Her Majesty the Queen Queen. This is the first time that the Queen has, of course, has not been in London to appoint her new Prime Minister, but up in Balmoral. But before that, let's bring you right up to date with all of the day's news. Here's Rosie.
A very good morning. It's 11:32. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. Boris Johnson has arrived at Balmoral to see the Queen and to officially resign as Prime Minister. Earlier this morning, outside Number 10, he promised his fervent support to his successor and reflected on his government's achievements. Boris Johnson highlighted Brexit, the COVID vaccine rollout and support for Ukraine. Mr Johnson also said that the incoming Prime Minister, Liz Truss, and her new cabinet will do everything they can to support families through the energy crisis.
I will be offering this government nothing but the most fervent support. I'll tell you why, this is a tough time for the economy. This is a tough time for families up and down the country. We can and we will get through it and we will come out stronger the other side. But I say to my fellow Conservatives, it's time for politics to be over, folks. It's time for us all to get behind Liz Truss and her team and her programme and deliver for the people of this country.
Well, Liz Truss, whose plane landed in Aberdeen a short while ago, is also on her way to Balmoral, where she'll be appointed Prime Minister by the Queen. Later this afternoon, she's expected to announce an emergency support package to deal with the energy crisis when she addresses the nation for the first time from Downing Street. She'll also name her new cabinet. Let's look at some other news now. And a man's died after being shot by police in South London. Lambeth Police says a suspect vehicle was being chased and officers deliberately crashed into the car, forcing it to stop in Streatham Hill on Monday night. The Met Police has referred itself for an investigation into the incident. The father of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corpel, who was shot in Liverpool, says her death cannot be in vain. John Francis Pratt is appealing for anyone with information to come forward. Detectives have been granted a 36-hour extension to question 3 men over her death. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Alastair will be back in a moment.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV.
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's
News Channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Hello, it's 23 minutes to 12. This is Britain's new Prime Minister with me, Alastair Stewart, here on GB News. We are live on your television, online and radio this morning. We know for a fact that Boris Johnson is now inside the Balmoral estate, ready to tender his resignation to Her Majesty the Queen, and we know that Liz Truss, his appointed successor, has landed safely after a bit of a delay coming into Aberdeen Airport and is now driving with her entourage to Balmoral. So once Boris is in, out and on his way, she can then go in and kiss hands with Her Majesty the Queen to become Her Majesty the Queen's 15th Prime Minister. So you won't miss a bit of it. We're here, we're in Balmoral, we're at Downing Street, all of it live here on GB News. Our London reporter Alice Porter is also live in Uxbridge for us. Why Uxbridge, you might ask? Well, that's because it's Boris Johnson's constituency. Used to be Henley, now it's Uxbridge. Alice, are they doom-laden, gloom-laden, or glad to get their boy back?
Well, I have to say, Alastair, it is a bit of a mixed picture. I've been here so many times over the last few months trying to get people's reactions to the various shenanigans going on in Westminster, and a lot of people have been frustrated, I think, with Boris Johnson as a constituency MP. We've had issues to do with the police station closing here just last month, 3 state-run nurseries closed. So a lot of people have said to me that they're frustrated with him as a constituency MP because he's been so preoccupied with Westminster. But then there's also been, I would say, just as many people who are incredibly loyal to the PM. I mean, remember, this has been a very safe Tory seat ever since it was first created in 2010, and there are many people who are still immensely loyal to the Prime Minister, or the Prime Minister that he was. I was out and about speaking to people in Uxbridge this morning about getting their reaction to Boris Johnson's resignation, and this is what they had to say.
Basically, I think he's going to be missed in some ways, and I hope he's going to stay in Parliament. I mean, he's no idiot, is he?
I don't kind of agree with it. Because I thought he was doing a very good job for the last couple of years, particularly during the COVID pandemic, where the government acted very quickly to put policies and programs in place to help people, whether it's vaccine rollout.
It's sad. I don't know why I had to resign. It's not fair. He was doing so well, helping us out of Brexit and dealing with COVID. All this came just as he took office, and now poor Liz Truss has got to deal with the energy crisis.
I think it had to happen. He lost the confidence of the public, and he lost the confidence of his team as well, like the cabinet as well. So if you haven't got support, there was a vote of confidence, but it was probably one of the lowest figures in history, and history suggests that he had to go.
Well, there you go. There were some of Boris Johnson's constituents giving their reaction to his resignation. But I think it also provokes the question of what exactly is he going to do next? Is he going to be a constituency MP after being Prime Minister? I mean, remember, he's not from Uxbridge. And a lot of people here that I've been speaking to feel very much that he's been sort of parachuted into the area. He's not from the area, and maybe feel that he's not going to get involved with all the comings and goings of kind of local politics after you've been trying to sort out issues to do with Ukraine and Putin. So that's what some people been feeling, and of course he can't lobby the government for the next 2 years. That's up as part of the rules. But I think it also raises questions about what exactly is going to happen to this seat in the next election, because it's interesting to see if Labour may make a bid for it, because Boris Johnson only won by just over 7,000 votes in the last election. So they may use this as an opportunity to try and take Uxbridge and Ruislip for the first time.
Absolutely fascinating and terrific to hear that mixed opinion on the ground there from the good people of Uxbridge. Alice, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed, and we'll be back in touch with Alice if there are further developments in Boris Johnson's constituency. We asked for your views via email, Twitter, and the rest of it. Began these 2 hours with much commentary about why they're using 2 aeroplanes and save the planet and all that stuff. John has just hit the nail on the head from a slightly different angle. Isn't it ironic that Liz Truss, the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and Boris Johnson, the outgoing Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, are both using French Dassault aircraft? Perhaps we should have British ones. Let's return now to reflect upon Boris Johnson. And I want to remind you, if you were watching earlier, you will have heard me say this before. I make no apology because it's a very powerful message. It's the Nettie Rose email. Together with millions of people, I'm witnessing a sad day for our country. We've booted out a brilliant Prime Minister who has a record of amazing achievements in spite of the huge obstacles put in his way. And Shiraz from York joins the conversation to say, "Hi, Alastair. I've never watched politics before Boris, and once he was chosen, I did. He got me hooked. I'm not yet sure that she will keep me watching." So that's some of the tone and thought and reflections that you yourselves are having. Let's get some now from political commentator Ian McWhirter, who follows these things very closely and something of a student of the popular Member of Parliament for Uxbridge. There's a lot of that out there, isn't there, Ian, that ordinary folk within the Conservative Party and ordinary folk within the country feel that we may have shot ourselves in the foot a bit.
Well, yes, I think I think you could see on some of their faces today outside Downing Street, some of the senior Conservatives just thinking, what on earth have we done? Because Boris Johnson has a unique capacity to engage with people above class and above region. Now, I'd accept Scotland from that, where I'm based just now, because that Scotland is particularly averse to his public school demeanour. But nevertheless, across the UK as a whole, we saw in the election that he's able to communicate with people who are not normally Tory voters or Tory sympathisers. I mean, and his, people say, well, his speech of farewell was all boosterism. And certainly it was. But look how it got everybody talking about Cincinnatus and whether or not Cincinnatus really did go back to his plough or whether he came back after a decent interval to put down another revolt by the plebeians. I mean, he's got this ability to command the airways, sometimes for the wrong reasons, obviously, and particularly that was the case over Partygate. But I think as history looks back on Boris Johnson, and, I think Liz Truss in her statement yesterday kind of made the point when she said that, he delivered Brexit, he won a landslide election, he delivered the vaccine rollout, and he united Europe against the Ukraine. And historians are going to look back in this period and say, how on earth did someone who had those kind of achievements get thrown out of office because of a party in number 10, which was organised by his civil servants and not by him?
Ian, let me butt in. I didn't want to because I was following your analysis very crisply, but while you were speaking, for folk listening to our conversation on radio rather than television, we also cut up pictures of Boris Johnson clambering out of the Range Rover at Balmoral, being greeted by an ADC, and I presume, I didn't recognise the face, I'm afraid, but Her Majesty's Private Secretary, probably, on the way in. Here's a very simple human question. How will he feel? I get your point about boosterism and the rocket launcher and all of that stuff falling into the Pacific. But there's the picture, full frame now. Aide-de-camp on the left, Prime Minister outgoing on the right, Private Secretary in the middle. What's going through that man's mind?
Well, I think, Boris Johnson is a supreme optimist, and I think that was even more than his gift for metaphor and jokes. I think it was his optimism which really captured people's imaginations and led to a lot of people, you heard it earlier, a lot of people being instinctively fond of Boris Johnson, whatever the press and even people in his own party were saying about him being this kind of right-wing monster. He never was that. I mean, he was actually a liberal Conservative. It's only now that we see actually a real Conservative, Liz Truss, coming into office that we can see the extent to which Boris Johnson departed from the normal Conservative script, particularly in economics. I mean, another of his legacies, of course, will be the fact that the total burden of taxation is now greater than it has ever been since the 1950s. And, that is a very significant development. Public debt is rising over 100% of GDP. And these are issues which are going to weigh very heavily on Liz Truss as she comes in and she gets informed of the numbers. But I think about what's going through people's minds, look at Boris Johnson's delivery and his statement. The kind of, not just his boosterism, but his his obvious ability to ride out these kinds of crises. Remember when Theresa May stood down, the anguish on her face. She burst into tears at the last moment. She obviously felt humiliated. She felt, and she'd been rejected. She was deeply unhappy about the circumstances. You had none of that from Boris Johnson.
No.
He said, he just told everyone how great he'd been, marched off, nearly dragged Carrie into lampposts, of course, before he got in his brain.
I tell you what, Ian, if not a book, there's certainly a lovely article to be done on that, because I clearly remember that, and then coming to my mind was Margaret Thatcher sitting in the back of the Daimler with Dennis, weeping. On camera, weeping. But I also remember Dave Cameron, as he walked back in, having resigned. I mean, it is interesting how they play it, but did you 100% take on board that Boris Johnson was saying, like a booster rocket that falls into the Pacific, never to be reused, that he'll never be reused?
I think it's most unlikely. I mean, I think he's leaving he's obviously leaving the door slightly ajar. I think he's been, with the Cincinnatus reference, and he said "Hasta la vista, baby" and his departure from the Commons, from the dispatch box, which of course echoes, the Terminator, who will be back. I mean, he's toying with us, and I think people realize he's toying with us. He's having a laugh. He's just showing, maybe he would come back. I think this is most unlikely. He's off, as he says, to earn his fortune, writing newspaper columns, delivering speeches, and writing his memoirs. And that'll be very interesting. And it seems improbable to me that he's ever likely to return, but you can never rule it out. And of course, he's a biographer of Churchill. Churchill similarly was disowned by his own party and eventually was called back. And I think, he would always have that possibility in his script.
OK, Ian, great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Do stay in touch with us. Ian McWhirth there, great political observer. So here we have, this is the departures. As Shakespeare said, they have their entrances, they have their exits. That is Boris Johnson's departure, no longer Prime Minister. Cameron Walker is there live for us outside Balmoral. Cameron.
Saw Boris Johnson there with his wife, Carrie, leaving from the gates of Balmoral Castle. He is no longer Prime Minister. He has tendered his resignation. I think it's fair to say that he's had a perhaps slightly turbulent relationship with Her Majesty the Queen at times over the years. Just a few hours into his premiership, he reportedly let slip to an aide what was said in the private meeting between himself and Her Majesty the Queen. The Queen reportedly told him she didn't know why anyone would want the job of Prime Minister. Then, of course, in 2019, he effectively forced the Queen to prorogue Parliament. Critics said that was his attempt of kind of bypassing parliamentary scrutiny in the run-up to Brexit Day. And then, of course, the Supreme Court found that proroguing of Parliament was indeed unlawful. But the Queen's hands were tied. She is bound by the Constitution. She acts on government ministers' advice, so that is what she had to do. And then Boris Johnson had to make a grovelling apology to Her Majesty the Queen following the Partygate scandal, where it was found that Downing Street staff were partying on the eve of Prince Philip's funeral. We all remember that iconic image of Her Majesty sat alone in St George's Chapel in Windsor during coronavirus restrictions just a day before the Prime Minister's staff was partying in Downing Street. Well, very shortly, in the next couple of minutes, we expect the new leader of the Conservative Party, Liz Truss, to arrive here at Balmoral, where she will be invited to form a government on behalf of Her Majesty the Queen. A car is coming, actually. No, it's just a police car, sorry. It's just a police car, but yes, we're expecting her to be invited to form a government on behalf of the Queen, and she will be the Queen's 15th Prime Minister.
Cameron, thank you very much indeed. And you stay there because the final chapter is yet to be written And we want your thoughts upon that just as soon as we can possibly have it. So, Cameron Walker there, thank you very much indeed. And joining us now, I'm delighted to say, is royal broadcaster and commentator Rafe Heidel-Mankoo to discuss all of this further. Rafe, good of you to find time for us on a busy day. I do genuinely find all of that stuff that Cameron was just talking about fascinating, because there is a royal playbook. This is how things should be done and will be done. And for the convenience and comfort of Her Majesty, that's gone out of the window, and it's Balmoral. But the same cast of characters. Talk us through what would have just been happening with Boris Johnson and what will shortly happen with Liz Truss.
Yes, indeed. Hello, Alastair. Well, I mean, what a difference a year makes, because it was 1 year ago today that Boris and Carrie Johnson were also saying goodbye to Her Majesty at Balmoral and thanking her for inviting them up for the weekend. This time, 1 year later to the day, it's a rather longer farewell. But yes, Boris Johnson arrived to be greeted by the Queen's equerry and her private secretary, Sir Edward Young. His entourage would then have been taken off to a side room to wait and have refreshments, whilst Boris Johnson had a private meeting with Her Majesty the Queen, at which he would tender his resignation, and then they would have had a conversation. As Cameron said, we're not privy to what is actually being said in those conversations, but he was raked over the coals by his staff for having divulged what Her Majesty is alleged to have said. One rather wonders, given what Liz Truss is inheriting in terms of her in tray, whether the Queen isn't minded to think likewise. Why would anybody really want the job of Prime Minister right now? And then he's departed. And of course, the palace are very keen on protocol and ceremonial. So Liz Truss's team will have been notified once the Johnson team have left, that there'll be no chance whatsoever of the two parties crossing each other at Balmoral. And then when Liz Truss arrives, there will be the famous kissing of the hands, which actually doesn't take place. There's no physical kissing of hands. It's merely a traditional statement to acknowledge that the Queen has accepted the decision to make Liz Truss her new Prime Minister. There will be a formal kissing of hands at a Privy Council meeting. Traditionally, that's where even Jeremy Corbyn and others do physically kiss the hands, although Tony Benn kissed his own thumb rather than the Queen's hands. But unfortunately, on this occasion, there's also going to be a break with tradition, because that will become an online virtual Privy Council, because the Queen is of course, at Balmoral.
Rafe, absolutely brilliant, uninterrupted, everything we needed to know. Great to talk to you. Thank you always for finding time for us. We will talk again soon. That's Rafe Heidel-Mankoo, a royal expert. Delighted to say that you've been getting in touch with us left, right and centre, not only on the emails, but live. Here we are. James joins us now. James, what did you make of the battle between Rishi and Liz, first and foremost?
Well, I think it was media-driven, Alastair, quite honestly. I thought it was very unfair towards Rishi Sunak in terms of the support that, in general, the media, whether it was a TV, online, or the newspapers themselves, I thought they were very biased towards her and never asked her any questions on how she was going to fund all these typical electoral promises, that we see at a general election. They never come about. It's like Boris shouting at us today. Well, he failed with 50,000 nurses. He failed with leaving the EU. He failed with, no tax increases. We're now the most tax we've ever been since just after the war. He failed with a triple lock. He failed with net zero. He failed with a disadvantage that he was supposed to going to give, 2.2 billion to. And she's going to carry on in the same manner.
I have to butt in, otherwise we're both going to fall off air. 30 seconds on. Are you now confident about Liz Truss, or is it still jury out?
Still the same. Yeah, I think her name suggests, the distrust that I have in her. I really don't know how she's going to fund what she's saying with tax cuts without using the money she's going to borrow.
James, we have to leave it there. We'll have to leave it there. I do apologise, but thanks for joining us live. That's James there, one of our many viewers, giving his thoughts. I'm sorry I have to interrupt it, but we're coming up to the top of the hour. So that is it from me for now, on To The Point. But don't go away, because next up it'll be The Briefing with Mark and Gloria. From me, a very good afternoon to you. Bye-bye.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update. Showers again today. In fact, for the rest of this week, it'll be a similar headline. Heavy showers, thunderstorms in places, but it won't rain all day. Between the showers, there will be some sunshine. Look at this large area of low pressure dominating and not moving anywhere. Just around it, bands of showers will continue to track their way across the UK. So the showers will be in bands. There will be slots where you could be dry for several hours. Probably not too many showers at all today across parts of East Anglia, and we'll see some decent spells of sunshine over the Midlands and northwest England. But elsewhere, the showers will come and go. Some heavy downpours likely. As I said, the risk of thunderstorms as well may even cause some local problems. Certainly some pretty grim conditions on the roads. But when the sun's out, it's still pretty warm with temperatures in the low 20s. Through this evening, we'll continue with this area of low pressure to throw bands of showers across the country. Another one moving northwards overnight. Again, heavy downpours are possible. So again, expect a fair amount of spray and surface water on the roads.